On Tuesday, November 2nd, voters in Texas will get to decide a bunch of local races and vote on ballot measures that are not getting a ton of national press because we're not talking about governor or senators or anything like that. But there's one proposition on the ballot across the state that really needs more attention because Republicans in the Texas legislature already passed it unanimously, and many Democrats joined them in doing so. And if voters support it, it will permanently change the state constitution for the worse. Which I know in Texas is like saying a bottomless pit will get even deeper, but this really would be a disaster. Proposition 3 would ban any government official from closing or restricting a church service or any other place of worship in the future. You can probably see why that sounds good. As one Republican lawmaker said in pushing for this, quote, "Churches provide essential spiritual, mental, and physical support in a time of crisis," unquote. Stopping that in any way, he said, would interfere with their religious freedom. And look, I am all for religious freedom. I'm also willing to admit churches do provide a valuable service for a lot of people, even if I think the beliefs underlying what they do are wrong. But this isn't about freedom. This is about safety. Not just for the churchgoers either, but for everyone in contact with them. I don't need to rehash everything about COVID with all of you, but one of the ways responsible government leaders tried to stop the spread of the virus was to restrict public gatherings. Restaurants closed down entirely or had to limit the number of people inside. Public schools went remote. Grocery stores might have remained open because we need food, but even then you had to wear a mask to get inside. And obviously, you don't go to a grocery store to hang out and chat with your friends. You go in, you get what you need, you get out. That's why grocery stores staying open were not that big of a deal. Now, when you say there can't be large gatherings indoors, that's obviously bad news for churches. That's why many churches across the country argued that restrictions like those were unfair to them. Sure, they could live stream services, but church, they argued, requires in-person worship. They never really said out loud that it's also easier to collect money when you're all in the same room. But even if you think churches should meet in person, who cares? We're in a pandemic. Even when churches were allowed to be open, but with some limitations on how many people could attend at one time, pastors still complained about that because, I don't know, Jesus can only hear you, apparently, if you're all jam-packed in the same room and breathing the same air. God is all-powerful, but if you broadcast a sermon via YouTube or Facebook, you're all going straight to hell, I guess. Those sensible restrictions apply to all of us, by the way. It's not like atheists could get together in a restaurant, but religious people could not. But a bunch of conservative Protestants and Catholics who love to pretend to be persecuted acted like the restrictions were targeting them specifically. Why? Because they're just very arrogant and very stupid. They filed lawsuits over this, and conservative courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, often took their side, telling state governments that if grocery stores could be open because they're essential, then churches could be open too, which makes no sense at all because those places are nothing alike. But those court decisions have allowed COVID to continue spreading and mutating. So back to Texas. Conservatives there now want to block government officials from ever shutting down churches or limiting them for any reason in the future, even if there's a deadly virus, even if everything else is shut down. If this proposition passes, then in theory, public schools could be closed, but Joel Osteen's megachurch in Houston, which holds up to 16,000 people at a time, would be allowed to remain open, even in the middle of another pandemic. They'll close during a hurricane, but stay open when there's a virus. If COVID could write a bill, this would be it. The entire proposition uses the language of religious freedom to ignore very real concerns about public safety. And the saddest thing about it is that while Republicans unanimously supported the proposition, most elected Democrats in Texas backed it too because they didn't want to come across as anti-religious. If there was one time when they could get away with it, this would be it. But no. And now it'll be up to voters. That's why I have to reiterate. This amendment, Proposition 3, has nothing to do with religious freedom. This is entirely about allowing the excuse of religion to supersede public safety protocols. A deadly virus doesn't care what you believe. It just needs people to infect. If this proposition passes, religious institutions that choose to remain open in the midst of a pandemic would be putting the spread of a virus over the well-being of their communities. All presumably while talking about how pro-life they are. It's just utter madness in the name of faith. Now, at least some sensible people, even religious ones, are trying to sound the alarm. The leader of the Baptist Joint Committee, for example, they're the good Baptists, said the proposition sends, quote, a damaging message that religious people are more concerned about special treatment than they are about the good of their communities, unquote. That's exactly right. The conservative Christians who fight to hold in-person church services are selfish people, many of whom have also been spreading lies about masks and vaccines. They do not care if people die from the virus as a result of their egos and ignorance. They've been brainwashed into thinking fighting on behalf of Christianity trumps everything else at all times. They think they know how to protect your health better than government health experts and doctors and scientists who have spent their lives studying this stuff. And no amount of Herman Cain awards will convince them they're wrong. The opposition to this proposition, the good side, isn't on some quest to limit church services. We just recognize that this is about granting church leaders some special right to potentially hurt people and get away with it, while shutting out the people whose job it is to keep us safe. Public safety rules are meant to apply to everyone. Proposition 3 is as insane as a church saying, we don't need fire extinguishers or light up exit signs in our building, no matter what the local rules are. Secular safety rules are meant to help everybody, not persecute you specifically. Unfortunately, there is a good chance Christian arrogance will now be codified into state law. Again. Even if you don't live in Texas, this could quite literally affect you. Or should I say, infect you. As one law professor put it, quote, there are very few occasions or reasons on which it would ever be necessary to shut down a place of worship, but COVID is one. Why would Texans pass a law tying the hands of health experts in the middle of an emergency? That's like cutting a hole in a fire hose while the fire is still raging. Why would you do it? So, if you do live in Texas, please vote no on Proposition 3. It could save lives, something Republicans and conservative Christians in the state do not care about. Early voting is open. You could do this now. And because it's an off-year election with probably very low turnout, this is not a done deal. This can be stopped. But only if people care.